Incoterms 2010. Well, Incoterms 2010 is the eighth set of predefined international contract terms published by the International Chamber of Commerce, with the first set having been established in 1936. Incoterms 2010 defines 11 rules down from the 13 rules defined by Incoterms 2000. 4 rules of the 2000 version are replaced by 2 new rules, that is delivered at frontier, delivered ex ship, delivered ex trade and delivered duty unpaid, are replaced by delivered at terminal, delivered at place in 2010 rules. In the prior version, the rules are divided into 4 main categories, but the 11 predefined terms of Incoterms 2010 are subdivided into 2 main categories based on the method of delivery. The larger the group of 7 rules may be used regardless of the methods of transport, with a smaller group of 4 being applicable only to the sales that solely involve transportation by water, where the conditions of goods can be verified at the point of loading on board ship. They are therefore not to be used for containerized freight, other combined transport methods, or for transport by road, rail, or air. Incoterms in government regulations. In some jurisdictions, the duty cost of the goods may be calculated against a specific Incoterm. Especially in India, duty is calculated against CIF, carriage insurance price value of goods, and in South Africa, the duty is calculated on free on board value of goods, FOB. Because of this, it is common for the contracts for the exports to those countries to use the Incoterms even when they are not suitable for choosing the mode of transport. If this is the case, a great care should be exercised to ensure that the points at which cost and risk pass are clarified with the customer. Rules for the any mode of transport first. EXW. X box. EXW, that is X box, named place of delivery. The seller makes the goods available at a premises or at any other named place. This term places a maximum obligation on the buyer and the minimum obligations on the seller. The X box term is often used when making an initial quotation for the sale of goods without any cost included. EXW means that the buyer incurs the risk of bringing the goods to their own final destination. Either the seller does not load the goods on collecting the vehicles and does not clear them for export, or if the seller does load the goods, it does so at the buyer's risk and cost. If the parties agree that the seller should be responsible for loading of the goods on departure and to bear the risk and all the costs of such loading, this must be clear by adding explicit wording to this effect in the contract of sale. There is no obligation for the seller to make a contract of carriage, but there is no obligation for the buyer to arrange one. Either the buyer may sell the goods on their own customer for collection from the original seller's warehouse. However, in common practice, the buyer arranges the collection of freight from the designated location and is responsible for clearing the goods through the customs. The buyer is also responsible for completing all the export documentation, although the seller does have an obligation to obtain the information and documents at the buyer's request and cost. These documentary requirements may result in 2 principal issues. First one is a stipulation for the buyer to complete the export declaration can be an issue in certain jurisdictions, not at least the European Union, where the customs regulations require that the declarant to be either an individual or corporate resident within the jurisdiction. If the buyer is based outside the customs jurisdiction, they will be unable to clear the goods for export, meaning that the goods may be declared in the name of the seller in breach of EXW term. Secondly, jurisdictions require companies to provide proof of export for tax purposes. In EXW shipment, the buyer is under no obligation to provide such proof to the seller, or indeed to even export the goods. In a customs jurisdiction such as European Union, this would leave the seller liable to sales tax bill as if the goods were sold to the domestic customer. It is therefore of utmost importance that these matters are discussed with the buyer before the contract is agreed upon. It may well be that another Incoterm such as FCA seller's premises may be more suitable, since this puts the bonus for declaring the goods for export on the seller, which provides more control over the export process. FCA, free carrier, named place of delivery. The seller delivered the goods cleared for export at a named place, possibly including the seller's own premises. The goods can be delivered to a carrier nominated by the buyer or to another party nominated by the buyer. In many respects, this Incoterm has replaced FOB, free on board, in the modern usage, or through the critical point at which the risk passes or moves from the loading abroad the vessel to the named place. It should also be noted that the chosen place of delivery has an impact on the obligations of loading and unloading the goods in that place. If delivery occurs at the seller's premises or at any other location that is under the seller's control, the seller is responsible for loading the goods on to the buyer's carrier. However, if the delivery occurs at any other place, the seller is deemed to have delivered the goods once the transport has arrived at the named place, but the buyer is responsible for both unloading the goods and loading them onto their own carrier. CPT, carriage paid to, named place of destination. CPT replaces the C&F, cost and freight, and CFR terms for all shipping modes outside of the non-containerized sea freight. The seller pays for the carriage of the goods up to the named place of the destination. However, the goods are considered to be delivered when the goods are being handed over to the first or main carrier, so that the risk transfers to the buyer upon handing goods over to the carrier at the place of shipment in the country of export. The seller is responsible for origin costs, including the export clearance and freight costs for carriage to the named place of destination, either the final destination such as the buyer's facilities or a port of destination. This may also be agreed by the buyer and seller, however. If the buyer refers the seller to obtain the insurance, the Incoterm CIP should be considered instead. CIP is carriage and insurance paid to. Again, it is named the place of destination. This term is broadly similar to the above CPT term, with the exception that the seller is required to obtain the insurance for the goods while in transit. CIP requires the seller to insure the goods for 110% of the contract value under at least minimum cover of the Institute Cargo Clauses of Institute of London. Underwriters or any other similar set of clauses. Then the policy should be the same currency as the contract and should allow the buyer, the seller, or anyone else with the insurable interest in the goods to be able to make a claim. CIP can be used for all modes of transport, whereas the Incoterm CIF should only be used for the non-containerized sea freight. DAT, delivery at terminal, named terminal at port or a place of destination. This Incoterm requires that the seller delivers the goods unloaded at the named terminal. The seller covers all the costs of transport, namely export fees, carriage, unloading from main carrier, a destination port or the destination port charges, etc., and assumes all the risks until arrival at the designated port or terminal. The terminal can be port, airport, or inland freight interchange, but must be a facility within the capability to receive the payment. All the charges after loading, for example, import duties, the customs duties on carriage, etc., are to be borne by the buyer. However, it is important to note that any delay or any demurrage causes at the terminal will generally be for the seller's account. DAT, delivery at place named place of destination. Incoterms 2010 defines DAT, delivery at place the seller delivers when the goods are placed at the disposal of the buyer on the arriving means of transport ready for unloading at the named place of destination. Under DAT terms, the risk passes from the seller to the buyer from the viewpoint of destination mentioned in the contract of delivery. Once the goods are ready for shipment, the necessary packing is carried out by the seller at his own cost so that the goods reach their final destination safely. All necessary legal formalities in the export country are completed by the seller at his own cost and risk to clear the goods for the export. After the arrival of the goods in the country of destination, the customs clearance in the importing country needs to be completed by the buyer at his own cost and risk, including all the customs duties and taxes. However, as per the DAT terms, any delay or demurrage costs are to be borne by the seller. Under DAP terms, all carriage expenses with any terminal expenses are paid by the seller up to the agreed destination point. The necessary unloading cost at final destination has to be borne by the seller under DAP terms. If unloading cannot be carried out by the seller, it might be better to ship under DAT delivered at terminal terms instead. So first one is DAT delivery at terminal, named terminal at port or the place of destination. This is only the place of destination. DDP, delivery duty paid, named place of destination. Seller is responsible for delivering the goods to the named place in the country of the buyer and pays all the costs in bringing the goods to the destination, including import duties and taxes. The seller is not responsible for unloading. The term is often used in place of non-Incoterm free in store (FIS). This term places the maximum obligations on the seller and the minimum obligations on the buyer. No risk or responsibility is transferred to the buyer until the delivery of the goods at the named place of destination. The most important consideration for DTP terms is that the seller is responsible for clearing the goods through customs in the buyer's country, including both paying the duties and taxes and obtaining the necessary authorizations and registrations from the authorities in that country. Unless the rules and regulations in the buyer's country are well understood, DDP terms can be very risky one, both in terms of delays and unforeseen extra costs, and should be used with a very high degree of caution. Rules for the sea and inland waterway transport. To determine if a location qualifies for these four rules, a place referred to United Nations Board for Trade and Transport locations. The four rules defined by Incoterms 2010 for international trade, where transportation is entirely conducted by the water or as per below. It is important to note that these terms are generally not suitable for shipments and ship containers. The point at which the risk and responsibility of the goods passes is when the goods are loaded on board the ship, on board the ship, and if the goods are sealed into a shipping container, it is impossible to verify the conditions of good at this point. Then it also to be noted that when the risk passes under these terms has been shifted from the previous editions of Incoterms, where the risk is passed at the ship's rate. FAS, free alongside ship, named port of shipment. The seller delivers when the goods are placed alongside the buyer's vessel at the named port of shipment. This means that the buyer has to bear all the costs and risk of loss or damage to the goods from that moment. The FAS term requires the seller to clear the goods for export, which is a reversal from previous Incoterms versions that requires the buyer to arrange for the export clearance. However, if the parties wish the buyer to clear the goods for export, this would be made clear by adding the explicit wording to this effect in the contract of sale. This term should be used for the non-containerized sea freight and inland waterway transport. FOB, free on board, named port of shipment. Under FOB terms, the seller bears all the costs and risks up to the point unloaded on board the vessel. The seller must also arrange for export clearance. The buyer pays the cost of marine freight transportation, bill of lading fees, insurance, unloading and transportation costs from the arrival port to destination. Since Incoterms 1980 introduced the FCA Incoterm, FOB should only be used for non-containerized sea freight and inland waterway transport. However, FOB is still used for all modes of transport despite the contractual risk that this can introduce. CFR, carriage cost and freight, named port of destination. The seller pays for the carriage of the goods up to the named port of destination. Risk transfers to the buyer when the goods have been loaded on board the ship in the country of export. The shipper is responsible for all in costs, including export clearance and for freight costs for carriage to the named port. The shipper is not responsible for delivery to the final destination from the port, generally the buyer's facilities or the buying insurance. If the buyer does not require the seller to obtain the insurance, the Incoterm CIF should be considered. CFR should be used only for non-containerized sea freight and inland waterway transport. For all other modes of transport, it should be replaced by CPT. CIF, cost, insurance and freight, named port of destination affair. This term is broadly similar to the above CFR term, but with the exception that The seller is required to obtain the insurance for the goods while in the transit to the named port of destination. CIF requires the seller to insure the goods for 110% of their value under at least the minimum cover of the Institute Cargo classes of Institute of London underwriters, which would be the Institute Cargo classes C or similar set of classes. The policy should be in the same currency as the contract. CIF can be used by any transport by sea and air, not limited to containerized or non-containerized cargo, and includes all charges up to the post-terminal of entrance. CIF covers additional charges at the port and terminal of entrance. So we have seen the various terminologies that has to be used in the contract, that is the Incoterms, International Chamber of Commerce. So the Incoterms have been defined in many ways, that is EXW, express, that is it is from the named place of delivery. FCA, free carrier handling, it is named place of delivery. CPT, carriage paid to, it is named place of destination. CIP, carriage and insurance paid to, named place of destination. DAT, delivery at terminal, it is terminal at port or place of destination. DAP, delivered at place, again it's a named place of destination. DTP, that is the delivery duty paid, named place of destination. Then for the rules of sea and waterway, FAS, free alongside ship, again this is named port of shipment. FOB, free on board, named port of shipment. CFR, cost and freight, again this is named port of destination. CIF, cost, insurance and freight, again this is named port of destination. So these are all the basic terminologies that are used in the foreign exchange contracts.